What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the California Underground. Tonight, we have Assembly candidate for the 7th District in California Legislature, Josh Hoover. Will be joining about his race, what what he's looking to do, what his candidacy is about, his positions, everything. We're going to grill him on a whole bunch of stuff, including his time on school board and ask him what's going on in San Diego and his opinion on that. As always, I have my trusty co-host Cynthia here with me as well. So how's everyone doing tonight?
Doing great.
I'm
We're
doing
looking
good.
forward to speaking with Josh.
Excellent. So let's just jump right into it. Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience, about where you got your start, why did you start this campaign, and why did you feel like now is the right time to jump in and run for assembly?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm really excited to be here tonight. Just a quick introduction of myself. I am a parent of 3 kids up here in Folsom, California, running for the 7th Assembly District, which is a district that is a newly drawn district in Sacramento County. And I'm currently a school board member on the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. And I also serve as the chief of staff for Assemblyman Kevin Kiley in the legislature. Honestly, I was planning to run for school board again this year. I've been serving on our school board since 2018. And I think when I originally got elected, I had no clue what was coming down the road for school board members with COVID. And so that's been a huge battle over these last few years. But districting happened, community presented it. I decided to take the jump and run for the seat, and it's going to be a real. Our goal is to bring some balance back to the legislature. Common sense.
Yeah, I was looking at your Ballotopedia and I was looking at the primary results and adding it up. You got 34%, which is really good. You blew away all your challengers. Wasn't even close between you and the other Republicans running. But if you take your numbers plus all the other Republicans and then you add it up and add it to or compare it to Ken Cooley's, you're at 49% of the vote and he's only at 51% of the vote. So this is a really tight race, correct?
It's an extremely tight race, and it's starting to. We knew that from the beginning. In fact, Cal Matters labeled this seat a leans Republican seat. So if this seat were open, if there was no incumbent running, this would traditionally be a Republican seat. But because of that incumbency advantage, it's a little bit closer. But we're super excited. It's going to be a very tight race, and one of the interesting aspects of those numbers is, as you probably have talked about, turnout was very low in this primary election. But the most important demographic where turnout was low was among independent voters. In a lot of districts throughout the state, independent voters tend to skew Democratic, but in this district, in my district, it's a very fiscally conservative district, and those independent skew Republican. So, we're very excited about I think a lot of the victory really rests on those independent voters coming out to the polls and voting.
So it's always the most prominent question that has to be asked of any candidate, especially a Republican candidate running in California. How do you reach the independents? Because there is such I believe, a disconnect between what a national Republican is. They always try to tie you to Trump. You actually put a video up that I was just watching before. Your opponent tried to basically paint one of your competitors as a pro-Trump January 6th guy. How do you cut through that noise and get to the independents and say, look, I'm a Republican and I believe in these things, and that's why I'm going to make things better for California?
Well, we really, this is a state race. We're running to be in state government and really oversee state issues. And so my main goal is that I just try to stay focused on the issues, stay focused on the things that actually matter to the residents of my district up here, which is really a few very simple things. People want safe neighborhoods. They want great schools for their kids. And they want to be able to afford to live in California. They want their kids back here and raise their families someday. So they want their kids to be able to live in California and in our community. And so I think that message is very simple and it resonates in this community. It's a pretty suburban community, and whether you're on the left or the right or in the middle, we all move to this community for the same things. And so we're just trying to keep it focused on those issues, and also point out the fact that the status quo in California is going the wrong direction.
Is that something that you believe is a huge weakness or a blind spot for California Democrats, that they just continue to talk about the sort of social justice issues to pretend that they're progressive? It seems that's the only thing they try to be progressive on, is actually social justice. In terms of everything else, I would say all their policies are very regressive in terms of crime and schooling and the economy and a living wage or being able to even afford a house. All of those policies are regressive in California. Do you see what's going on with the California Democrats? Is they've gone too far to the left, and now there's an opportunity for Republicans to kind of fill in that void, fill in that middle, and say, hey, you want to come back to common sense?
Absolutely. I think California Democrats have certainly gone too far to the left, and really they've lost touch with the majority of Californians. In fact, increasingly, the Democratic Party is becoming a party of the elites. It's not a party of the working class. It's not a party that represents common man. It really, with inflation, with gas prices, with taxation, with education, all of these issues, they're showing that they for these issues and how to actually provide relief to Californians, particularly Californians in struggling right now. I mean, the issues like gas tax is a great example. My opponent voted increased the gas tax a few years ago. I think it was 2017. And then when gas prices skyrocketed, there was a bipartisan proposal put forward temporarily suspend that gas tax, and he took a while to vote on that. And I think that just shows a lack of connection with his district and with the people of California. But it's not just that. There's policies like AB 5, which significantly restricts independent contracting in California, which my opponent also voted for, that is now going to lead to a trucker shortage, supply chain issues, and probably higher prices at our grocery stores because of it. And then the third example I would use is, the left likes to say they care about climate change. I think, a lot of people understand that conservation and climate change are issues that are important. But when you look at policies that are going to solve those problems, the policies enacted in California just raise prices on consumers. We have a way to address those issues without making things more expensive for everyday Californians.
So speaking about the Democrat Party, you shed some light about how you're different from the incumbent Ken Cooley. Who exactly is he? Because he's not. I guess I'm curious. Like, is he like which fraction of the Democrat Party is he? Because he's not like making headlines like Alex Lee. He's not like the Speaker Anthony Rendon. Like, definitely, we'd love to know more about like your opponent.
Well, yeah. So just a little bit about him. I mean, I think he is a lot more like Anthony Rendon than he sounds. So, my opponent has been in the legislature for 10 years. He speaks like a moderate Democrat. In fact, in some of the interactions we've had during the campaign, he has said a lot of things that would appeal to more conservative voters. He sounds like a moderate. The problem is when you look at his voting record and what he has really fought for in the legislature, it does not reflect a moderate Democrat at all. In fact, it reflects a much more progressive Democrat. And the reason for that is because he has risen to a level of authority in the legislative leadership where he really has to toe the party line. It's not even, I'm not even sure if he believes some of the things that he votes for, but he's expected to vote a certain way in order to keep his position of leadership. And he basically does what he needs to do to keep that. And so whether that's, on the gas tax or AB 5 or whether, I just analyzed his Cal Chamber voting record for business. Is generally moderate Democrats tend to be more business. So I analyzed his voting record with Cal Chamber. He's voted for 10 in the 10 years he's been in the legislature. Those are bills that aren't just bad for business, they're terrible for business. Those are the bills that always die, even in California legislature. And he's voted for many of those bills. And that's not what moderate Democrats tend to do. And then his legacy project is also redoing the state capitol. So he has funneled over $1 billion of taxpayer resources into demolishing and rebuilding part of the state capitol building. That is what he's spending all of his time on. I think really matter to Californians.
It's funny because he paints in that ad that you have on your website that he's a moderate Democrat, that he's a
Right.
fiscally responsible moderate Democrat, which is not, as you're saying, it doesn't sound like it goes along with his record. But I think it also is an admission on his part, the district itself, in terms of what the voters want in that district. They want someone more moderate. They want someone more middle of the road. So it is important to highlight a lot of those failures. How do you plan on highlighting those failures? Are you planning to run ads to highlight those failures? Or are you going to? Do you guys have a debate coming up, or any debate scheduled?
Yeah, I'd love to debate. In fact, I think there's a few groups in the area that are looking at potentially setting some debates up. But that would, and I'm open to debating, but that would require Ken to agree to those, right? So time will tell if he actually agrees to debate. Generally, incumbents don't, but you know, I'm hopeful that we can get some sort of forum or debate put on the books. But you know, other than that, I mean, we're opening a headquarters right now. We've got ads already running on social media. We have a giant volunteer operation we're putting together. One of the great things about being in this region is this is going to be one of the biggest assembly races in the entire state. It's also going to be one of the biggest in our region, and we're going to get a lot of support from from surrounding counties and the Republican volunteers in those counties too, because this is really where the action is going to be. And so we have an army kind of descending on the district to walk precincts and make phone calls and send text messages, and you know, I'm sure we'll be sending a lot of mail and other things as well. But that's our goal. It's not to attack him personally. Our goal is to point out his voting record and the record that he brings to the position and how out of with the new district.
Well, Democrats never like to debate. That's always the funny thing, is they always want to debate and think they're on the right side, but then trying to get any of them in California to actually debate is always another thing. You're talking a lot about walking precincts, text messages. Talk a little bit about how, and I'm sure you've gained a lot of experience working with Kevin Kiley. You know, he's been very successful as a politician here in California, one of the most prominent, if not one of the most well known for, you know, on one side he's probably infamous and one side he's famous. Talk about how much you probably learned from him in terms of, like, you have to walk districts, you have to do mailers, you have to do text messages, you have to do phone banks. It's not all, let me just post on Instagram and see if I can win a race just through social media.
No, Kevin's really proved that, you know, one of the reasons Kevin's so successful, you know, a lot of people really like him. Some people, you know, a lot of people really gravitate to his message, and I think he's a fantastic communicator, and that is a huge part of his success. But what people don't see that is, I think, really the success is how hard that he works. And the reality is that to win elections in California, really at any level of government, whether it's local, state, or federal, you have to put in. And too often, you know, candidates just do that. And so if there's a lesson that, you know, I would like to take from Kevin's time with Kevin, it's that you have to put in the work and actually walk the precincts and knock the doors and raise the money and things that candidates need to do to win, because it's not just given to you. California, and that includes, you know, local races like school boards. Those aren't, you know, giveaways either. Those are, in fact, I'm kind of advising some local school board candidates up here, because one of my priorities is going to be recruiting and that's in our local community at the local level to run, and actually helping them, give them the tools they need to actually be successful in campaigns. And what I tell them all the time is you have to set time aside to fundraise, and you have to set time aside to walk precincts and get your message out there and actually meet people.
So I know that you walked precincts with one of our great friends of the show, Tamika Hamilton, and I know she places a really big emphasis on educating people that aren't even into politics and changing hearts and minds. So speaking of, your personal goal of, if you get elected, also, being involved in local politics and the community, what would you say are like some big misconceptions people have about running for office?
Misconceptions. Well, that's a good question. First of all, it's not glamorous and it's not fun. It's not really fun or easy. And I always try to prepare when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm interested in running for office." I really try to dig out of them, like, are you willing to really run for office, or do you just like the idea of being in office? But are you actually willing to put in the work? So, for example, when I ran for school board in 2018, there were 3 seats, I think 1 incumbent and 4 candidates for those 3 seats. At that time, it was at large. We've since gone to these district-based elections, which is a whole nother topic that's really changed some of the calculus. But my dad and I literally walked 9,000 doors in that race. Just me and him. It's harder to get volunteers at for local races because they're just not as high profile and people paying as close of attention to them. It's actually more work, I feel like, to run for local office because it's kind of all on you. Running for the state assembly, I have a team of like 10 people, and so I'm able to really share the load that it takes to run for office. But running for local office is really falls on the candidate and whoever you can talk into maybe helping you. And so I think you have to be willing to put in the work, really, knock doors. You might not raise a ton of money to be able to send a bunch of mail. So you really need to also connect with the major community leaders and the major community groups that really sway these elections locally as well.
So you brought up you want to help with candidates who are running for school board. Are you currently on school board, or you were on school board?
I'll be finishing out my term, so I'll be on my school board here until November.
So obviously there's always been, in the past 2 years, there's been a lot of controversy with school boards and school boards facing down a lot of angry parents.
Yeah.
Walk us through your time on school board in 2020, what that was like, especially in the face of the pandemic and a state that did not want to reopen schools at basically, the request of the teachers unions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in terms of, just in a leadership role of any kind, because it was very emotional, and it was very, you had parents on one side literally begging for us to open schools. And on the other side, you had teachers unions that were, pretty much begging to keep them closed. And really, they held a lot of the power because they didn't, the interesting thing about school boards is you do have the union interests, but you also have, district staff and whoever works on your staff in your school district, whether it's the superintendent or, her team or his team, those the most influential people in the process. So you have teachers unions kind of influencing staff, and then the staff will put forward recommendations. And one of the things that I find the most fascinating about school district politics is that when you become an elected school board member, I don't know how to exactly say this appropriately, but they really do try to indoctrinate you on what a school board member is supposed to be. And what I mean by that is they want school board members who are going to listen to the staff and who are going to implement recommendations from the superintendent. And they want school board members that aren't really going to push the boundaries on that relationship very much. The problem is that in my mind, that's not why we elect school board members. The superintendent is not elected and is not accountable. The superintendent is not as directly accountable to the voters specifically. That's why we have a school board, is that the voters 5 or 7 representatives that they want representing their kids in the schools. And it's really our job to be independent and thoughtful and to take staff recommendations and ask the right questions and figure out if that's the right way that our school district should go. But the job of a school district is to set policy and set direction. But when you become an elected school board member, they send you off to conferences where you are taught that school board members don't really rock the boat. And they just kind of go along and with staff recommendations. And that's what we saw a lot of in the pandemic, to be honest with you. We had teachers unions, but also health at the county level. We had health officials telling superintendents what they need to do and what they should do. And, you know, it was kind of the parents and the students that were really left unrepresented because in a lot of communities, the board just kind of went along with that. Now, in my district, we had the first district in Sacramento County to bring kids back to in-person instruction. And to this day, I'm still very, very proud of that because I have 3 kids in the schools, right? So, I mean, I was at home watching them, seeing them really struggle with distance learning. Back before anyone else in the county was a huge win. But at the end of the day, we were still far behind some in the region, and it was truly a battle just to get that done. So,
Do you think, but even before COVID, there was a strain, or was this relationship, has this been going on for a while, where school boards sort of ignore the voters and listen to the staffers and the superintendents, and COVID just kind of put a spotlight on it and highlighted how this relationship is?
Absolutely. For a long time. And, you know, for a long time, you know, so often the education establishment, as I like to call it, doesn't have the best interest of parents and kids in mind. In fact, most of the time, you know, obviously the teachers unions are advocating for their members, and that's kind of to be expected, but most of the time, district is really more worried about the bottom line and about enrollment than they are worried about outcomes and what, you know, is actually going on with the actual students. And so that's why I think we need more people to actually run for school board, because before COVID, nobody even knew who their school board member was or who sat on their school board in a lot of cases. And so what happens is these school boards get filled with a lot of, you know, just sometimes community members, a lot of times former teachers, a lot of times former, you know, education staff who really kind of will just kind of go along with whatever staff are going to say. And they've really acted as a rubber stamp, right? And that's kind of the status quo of a lot of school boards throughout the state. But what happened during COVID is parents woke up and said, wait a second, these people aren't, you know, protecting my interests and the interests of my kids. And it really came to the forefront that, you know, who's on your school board actually matters. And so what we're seeing more people stepping up to run for school board, which I think is probably one of the best things that came out of COVID, is that you have people actually engaging in local politics in that way. Because I think more parents need to run for school board. The other big problem that we have on school boards is that people without kids in the district, they don't have skin in the game. And so one of the things that we saw during COVID was it wasn't a left or right issue as much as it was a parent or non-parent issue. So we actually reopened schools multiple times on a 3-2 vote. And the 2 yes votes were the 2 people with kids in the school district. And the 3 no votes were people that had no clue how this was affecting kids. And so, you know, I really am glad to see more parents stepping up to run. But just to, you know, highlight how much higher profile this is than it used to be. You know, when I've been walking precincts for my assembly race, particularly in the area I represent on the school board, I can't tell you how many people are like, Josh, thank you for everything you did. I watched all of your meetings throughout COVID. I mean, it's incredible. Like, people would literally turn on their school board meetings every other Thursday while they're making dinner and watch their school board meetings because it was that important to them. That's never happened I feel like, at least as long as I've been around, when it comes to local school board politics. Nobody watches those meetings most of the time. So I definitely would say that people are more engaged than they used to be.
Of school boards' duties, COVID is obviously, I think it's been a blessing in disguise as far as getting people activated in local politics. But I do think it's important to emphasize that there are other things that a school board trustee does aside from COVID. And,
Yes.
I know it feels like we are still in the state of emergency, but at some point, like COVID, I'm hopeful it's going to be over. So what exactly does a school board trustee do? Like, what are things that you all talk about in your Thursday meetings aside from, unmasking children?
It's a great point. And to be honest with you, it's starting to get back to normal, but I mean, even down, in San Diego, we have the mask issue coming back up, right? So unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. And I can't wait for the day when we can stop talking about COVID. In my district up here, thankfully, we have not even discussed bringing back the mask mandate. There are zero plans to do that. And I think most of the board feels the same way, although I can't speak for all of them. But a lot of that too kind of gets pushed by your county as well. So it kind of depends on the county that you live in. But in terms of what school board members do, I mean, I think the job is actually, at least the job as I see it, is very basic from the standpoint of, you are really there to be the representative for the community, because there's no one else in the school district structure that really has the interests of the community in mind. As I mentioned earlier, staff tends to worry about budget and the bottom line and enrollment. Unions want, higher pay, more members, those sorts of things. And so really, there's very few interests that are there to protect the community. And I think that's what a effective school board member is supposed to do. They're supposed to be an accountability mechanism, really, and a check on the staff in the district. But a big part of the role of the school board is also to vote on a budget and to craft have a fiscally responsible budget, and to really make sure that they are good stewards of the taxpayer dollars that they're getting. And the other thing that I've tried to do as a school board member is really focus on outcomes for kids as well. And my community is very interesting because we have two cities in our school district. It's a unified school district, but it's actually two separate cities. One city is more affluent. The other city has a larger number of socioeconomic issues. And so you have a giant achievement gap in between the students in both of those communities. And so one thing that when I ran, was that I wanted to try to close that achievement gap between our two communities. And so we actually just, I guess a month ago now, maybe a couple weeks, approved the first charter school in this school district in over a decade, in Rancho Cordova. And that a huge step in the right direction, in my opinion, towards really providing just a new option for families. Nobody's required to go there, but it's going to provide options for families where they didn't have those options before. And I'm a big believer in that.
So this may be a pretty loaded question. Do you think the public education system as constructed in California has failed students in terms of how California is running it?
I think absolutely the education establishment is failing students. That's not to say it's beyond repair, but as it stands now, I do think in a lot of communities they have failed. Now, that's not to say there aren't public schools that are good quality in this state, but the sad thing is, and we talk a lot about school choice, it's like always a topic of conversation and everyone has different opinions on it. But the reality is that anyone with means has school choice, because they can either move and afford a home in a community with a fantastic school, or they can afford to send their child to a private school. But so many of the students in this state, particularly the ones that don't have those advantages, they're trapped in their neighborhood school. And in way too many cases, those neighborhood schools are failing them. And so I really think we need a reckoning in California education. There are a lot of special interests that are current kind of education establishment. And until that changes, I mean, one good example is that the CTA is the largest campaign donor in the state. I mean, it's really amazing. But that kind of campaign cash gets influence over policy. And the reality is our policies are reflective of the people that wield that influence. So it's I think we definitely need to shake things up in a lot at the local level. So
Yeah, and just the other day we saw news come out that the numbers from San Francisco and their public schools and the amount of those who were constantly absent and those who were not ready for even college or high school. The one glaring thing you take away from it is that those in minority communities are not being helped by public schooling. And that's always the argument, it seems, against school choice is, well, if you implement school choice, you're going to be hurting minority communities. But when you look at the numbers of San Francisco public schools, you see, but public schools are already hurting minority communities. And a lot has to do with the fact that they were on Zoom and there was this, I guess, notion that everybody had access to internet and technology, which they don't. It's clear that we see the evidence right in front of us that public schools, even in San Francisco, which you would assume has money, is failing a lot of the inner and minority communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. The idea that it's a funding issue. I don't know if you probably saw, but Newsom recently got an award for education in California. I think transformative improvements to education, and it was honestly one of the worst things I've ever seen, because not only even before COVID, California was near the bottom in almost every major academic metric, test scores. We were near the bottom before COVID. Was the longest school shutdowns in the country. I mean, we got our kids back last as a state compared to every other state in the. In fact, LAUSD specifically, they have a calculator online where you can calculate the level of learning loss based on the length. And it's like something like 22 weeks of learning that the kids in LAUSD lost because of school shutdown. Think about that number. It's truly astounding. And then, our governor gets an award for really the basis for that award was really just spending a lot of money. And that is so often what the leadership in California tries to do. They think that spending dollars is in itself a metric of success. But the reality is that it is not. Policy is really what matters. And obviously funding matters. But if the funding isn't paired with the right policies, it's just going to be thrown down the drain. And that's what we're seeing in California. We're spending some of the most money in the country, but we're getting some of the worst results. And what I like to tell people is you need to look at where kids are coming out and what their outcomes are, not what the inputs are for funding, right? Because so often that funding is going to the wrong places. And so that's a huge problem that I think we need to address as a state. But again, going back to the local thing, I mean, it also matters who is in your local community, because these are the ones that are approving charter schools and approving options for families. It's interesting. There was actually a bill a few years ago to clamp down on charter schools and make it harder to basically open a charter school in California. I was there that day when that bill was heard for the first time in the assembly. 500 people showed up to oppose that bill, most of them parents and students. Vast majority were African Americans and Latinos. this idea that somehow charter schools harm these communities, absolutely nonsensical. In many communities, those are the lifeline. And that's not to say we need to get rid of traditional public schools, but we really do ask ourselves, what is better for communities? And one of the things that a lot of the studies have found is that when you open a charter school, it actually improves the traditional as well, because they are then all of a sudden needing to and actually improve their outcomes as well. And it really does lift all. And so I think the Charter Schools Act and the charter is really a way that, it's not going to solve all our problems, but it is a way to be able to bring some balance back to academic outcomes in California.
So a couple questions for you. The first one is, like, for the caucus, if you get elected, there's caucuses, there's committees. Do you know if you get assigned to those, or do you get to pick, or does that get considered? And then my second question is, aside from the education committee, which other committees and caucuses in the state assembly interest you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you kind of get to pick, but not really. So you get to put in requests with the, so for example, as a Republican, I can put in requests with the Republican leader, and then the Republican leader can take those requests to the Speaker of the Assembly. But ultimately, the Speaker of the Assembly unilaterally approves or denies all of those requests. And so it really is kind of up to him or her, who gets on what committees. But in terms, obviously, the Education Committee, I'm also very interested in working on public safety issues, homelessness issues, really diving into those issues, because I think those are areas where California has a long ways to go as well. But I think I'd really love to sit on is housing, especially as a younger person with a young family. Housing is becoming a big problem in California. It's becoming so difficult to achieve, the American dream of home ownership in California, particularly if you're below, 35 or 30. And so how can we solve those problems? I'm very interested in working on those issues and finding a way to make California more affordable for younger families.
Going back to the Newsom award, I think you kind of nailed it on the head. I was joking. I thought that an award for the most teachers union kickbacks, but it sounds like it's true. You did give enough teachers unions kickbacks. I actually got in a Twitter spat with someone.
Yeah,
I'm sure the vicious cycle of you give me campaign cash, I pass and sign, give you more cash. And yeah, I mean, we could talk about public school and traditional schooling, but I did want to bring this. You still are running for assembly. This is not all about school board.
Right.
I got in a Twitter spat with someone, with 1,000 pronouns and a Ukrainian flag in their bio, about how it's a good idea to have these open air drug use areas and stuff like that. And I just asked them the simple question: if someone was an alcoholic, you wouldn't give them a bottle of Jack Daniels, right? So why do progressives in California believe it's compassionate to basically hand the substance to someone and enable them to to continue to act in a way that is quite literally killing them? And I fail to see the compassion and how that's progressive.
It's not progressive or compassionate, and again, this is kind of going back to what I said at the beginning, where we need candidates on the left and the right to bring common sense back to the legislature. And sometimes I think we're seeing some of that with the rejection of Chesa Bodine and the school board in San Francisco, and we're seeing voters really kind of like express that they're not, they may be left leaning, but they're not supportive of these extreme policies. But we really need that to continue to travel throughout the state. I actually don't know how many people actually think that's a good idea. There are some very loud progressive voices that are pushing for policies like that. But I think you have a lot of Democrats that really don't like the direction their party's going on those issues. They're seeing the polling and they're seeing that, crime and homelessness going up in communities isn't really great for election prospects. It's not really popular with voters. And, sadly, we're having to kind of experiment with these things before the Democrats actually realize this. But I'm really hopeful that over the next decade, the party starts to wake up and go, wait a second, we can't embrace these. One of the things that, and I think there will also be more opportunities when I'm in the legislature, I hope, for bipartisan, alliances on some of these issues. It's really interesting. The left really embraced Prop 47, which was the proposition passed in California. It was actually labeled the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act or something like that. But in reality, it reduced penalties for shoplifting, and it reclassified a bunch of crimes, and really has led to a lot of the surge in retail theft that we're seeing across the state. But one thing that it did that is never discussed, and maybe not never, but is rarely discussed, is it completely not eliminated, but it completely took away the ability for us to use the drug court system to help get people into substance abuse treatment. So before Prop 47, you used to be able, when someone would, get arrested and they were, on drugs or they were clearly an addict, you could offer them two options. You could say, here's some jail time, or you can go to substance abuse treatment. And for many of them, they chose substance abuse treatment for obvious reasons. What happened with Prop 47 is it got rid of that jail time in stick, right? So the carrot is still there, but the stick is no longer there. So there's no incentive for anybody to actually go and seek drug treatment. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing an increase in substance abuse and an increase in drug addicts on our streets. It's a huge problem. And then San Francisco is trying to go farther and actually allow it to happen in their streets. I mean, you have little kids trying to walk to school, and you have these areas where people are legally, quote unquote, using drugs. It really does boggle the mind, but I do think I don't think it's something that voters are going to put up with for very long.
So, in that, you bring up an interest. Democrats hopefully someday in California start to wake up. And do you think there are more? I mean, your opponent pretends he's moderate. But do you think there are more moderates than there are sort of the loud far left Bay Area progressives like the Alex Lees and the Scott Wieners who put out these bills that you look at and you just go, like, what are you thinking? Like, what you can tell this bill is completely geared towards your constituency in, San Francisco, and San Francisco has nothing to do with the rest of the state. Do you think there's more Ken Cooleys than there are Scott Wieners? And if so, why do the Scott Wieners and Alex Lees seem to run the party in California?
I mean, there might be, but the reality is the progressive left has done a really good job of pushing their agenda, even on people that maybe aren't fully supportive of some of these things, but they threaten these candidates that, if you don't go along with the progressive agenda, we're going to find someone more progressive and run them against you, right? And so I think the Democratic Party has a lot of infighting right now over those issues. People that want to take the party farther left, and you have some of these people that probably don't want that to happen. They know that's probably not good long term for the party, but they're not quite willing to stand up to the progressive left. I will say, though, there are some glimpses of hope. So there were two bills introduced by Democrats in this legislative cycle on public safety specifically. One would have increased the penalties for fentanyl distribution, and that bill was voted down in Public Safety Committee. There was also a bill introduced by a Democrat that would have made possession of a stolen firearm a felony. Again, a very common sense bill. This was proposed by a Democratic author, and that was also voted down in the Public Safety Committee. So on the one hand, yes, the progressive left really does kind of control things in Sacramento, but there are glimpses of hope. We see Democrats that are starting to put forward legislation that say, we're not going in the right direction on some of these issues, and we really need to change course. So I'm hoping that as voters continue to reject some of these more extreme ideas, that their representatives will start to reflect that as well.
Can you confirm or deny whether or not Alex Lee lives in his mom's basement?
I honestly have no clue. I don't know the answer to that, but I did see that mailer and I did see that attack ad, and that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. To be honest with you, you know, on the one hand, it wouldn't totally surprise me. He's very young. And on the other hand, he lives in a very expensive area. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we're talking about these things and it is kind of funny, but I mean, if you're a young, under 30 in California, it's getting harder to get out of your mom's basement. That's for sure.
So you do work, you're technically a Capitol staffer. So I guess like we're curious, like, I mean, you interact with these Democrats day to day. Like we live here in San Diego. So, you know, there's only so much we can know unless we're up there. Like, and we just see headlines, right? But like, what are like some interesting tidbits? Like, are these Democrats really as like mean as like the media makes them out to be? Like, we inquiring minds would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. You know, I mean, first of all, there's a big difference between the members of the legislature and the staff in the legislature. You know, staff tends to have some level of camaraderie because we're all kind of in this together in some ways. But we obviously have differences of opinion on a lot of things. We also agree on a lot of things. You know, what people don't talk about is like 70% of the bills that pass, you know, pass without any no votes, basically. You know, I mean, really the stuff that gets attention is probably in that 20 to 30% that is controversial. But we do pass a lot of laws that, you know, there is no disagreement on. That being said, I think things are changing, you know, in a way that I'm not as excited about, from the standpoint of, you know, it used to be where you could have a difference of opinion and still be friends and still hang out with people and still get drunk and disagree. How I feel about everybody. I have a lot of friends on the left that I can go get a. We don't have to agree on everything. That doesn't end the friendship, you know. And that's kind of how it used to be with a lot of the staff in the Capitol. You know, it's slowly changing. I think there's still some of that, but I think politics has become almost a religion at this point, which I think is probably not healthy for the nation and the state. Where, you know, if you disagree with me on policy or on politics, or you voted for this person and I voted for this person, then we just can't be friends. I think that's really dangerous. I think there was a poll, they've done that poll every few years on, you know, would you be happy if your daughter or your son married someone with the opposite political beliefs? And like consistently, that used to not even be a concern for anybody. And now it's like this big concern for a lot of people. I just think that's really, that doesn't reflect well on our culture. And I don't think it's healthy for our political debate. I really don't. And so I plan to be a legislator who wants to work across the aisle when we can, but who also, you know, is willing to voice opposition when it's needed to be voiced. And I think we can do both of those things respectfully and still be able to be colleagues.
Yeah, that's so important now than ever, where people just don't want to talk to each other anymore. Yeah. They automatically think, oh, you're a liberal or you're a conservative, I don't want to talk to you. And it's sad. I you know, I've lost connection with family members over COVID because of disagreements over COVID. They say, oh, well, you're a Trumper who doesn't believe in COVID, so I'm not going to talk to you anymore. When in reality, if you just, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, if you sit down with someone who is on the other side of the aisle politically, and you just sit there and talk to them,
Yeah.
You'll find out, I think, that you have a lot more in common than you do different.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I like to tell a story of how I went up to NorCal and visited with my wife's good friend up there, and she's deep blue in the Bay Area, very very far left. But when it came down to it, and we're having a coffee in San Francisco, and we're chatting about what's going on, what's the state of the city, it turned out we had a lot more in common than you would believe, and she had her gripes. So people
Yeah.
do need to learn to talk more and just get past that initial, I guess, stage of just judging people already off the bat.
Totally. You know, I've been doing a lot on social media because I think social media is terrible for that, because you really can't have a conversation or a logical discussion on social media. And so what I've been kind of doing in some of our
No.
local Facebook groups is I'll tell someone like, this isn't really something that can really be thoroughly discussed in a Facebook comment. So, let me send you my phone number and we can talk about it. And I've had a lot of teachers, even teachers that are upset or, about an issue call me, and we'll talk and we'll come to, we might not come to agreement, but we'll come to a level of understanding. And I think we need to get back to that place where we can do that, where we can treat each other like humans and not like, just avatars on social media or something. I think that's really a key to kind of changing that. I have a colleague on this crowd who I get every meeting, and we don't agree on everything. And we do agree on school choice. In fact, he joined me in supporting, I think is fantastic. But there's been issues that we've pretty strongly disagreed on. We go and we have a beer together and we talk about things and we get to know each other as humans. And I think we just need more of that in our political culture.
So we're coming up on close to the hour. I want to respect your time as a candidate. No, your time is very valuable. You're newly sworn in assemblyman. What are the top 3 goals Assemblyman Hoover, or assembly person, if you want to go by assembly person, assembly person Hoover wants to accomplish in his first term?
Yeah, that's the loaded question right there. I mean, it's to 3 things, but I think believe that public safety is king in this in communities. That's one of the things that I'm running on, is to really be an advocate for common sense public safety policy. And so to introduce some bills, or even find that would be willing to put bills forward in a bipartisan way to kind of scale back some of the crazy laws that we have. I certainly want to work on education. It's like right now, I don't have the bill out in front of me written, but we have to find a way to increase options for families in California. And I think I mentioned this. The problem in Sacramento right now on the homeless issue is that it is far too often portrayed the housing issue. Like, if we could only find housing or build homeless, then the problem would go away. But it completely denies the true root cause of the problem in so many cases is mental health issues, is substance abuse issues, as you talked about earlier. And so I really want to tackle those things. I think in a lot of ways, legislator, you can do that by providing accountability. So I would love to see us audit homelessness spending in California. I will be pushing hard for an audit of the billions of dollars that we are spending in on homelessness. We've spent something like $17 billion in the last few years on homelessness, and we have more homeless today than we had 5 years ago. So we need to get serious about auditing where those taxpayer dollars are actually going. And so that's something else that I plan to introduce as well.
Well, great. This was a great conversation. Thank you for coming on. Where can people find out more about you? And if they want you, where can they go and learn more?
Absolutely. That. So best place to go is www.hooverforassembly.com. So hooverforassembly.com is where you can go and learn more. You can also get connected there with me on social media, on Facebook and Twitter. So that's probably the best place to go.
And if you ask nicely, maybe on Facebook, Josh will hand out his phone number to you, so you
I don't know.
Chat away with him.
Anything, but I definitely
he's not giving out the
I'll
digits that easily.
Not tonight, but I'll send it in a private message. How about that?
There you ask nicely, maybe Josh will give you them digits. Great. Well, thank you for again, thank you for coming back to you in your campaign. Hope to see you sworn in and hop on a lot of these issues. It's definitely needed. It's going to be a tight race, and we're going to keep an eye on it. So thank you again for coming on.
I appreciate it. Hope to be back sometime.
Great. And as I always end every show, if you got something out and you know someone who might like this as well, text one friend or family member. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on audio, make sure you like, subscribe, and review. That helps with the algorithm. And, that's it. We'll see you on the next one. Good night, everybody.